Welcome back to We Need to Talk. I'm Darcy Sterling. Lately, my conversations with clients involve a lot of talk about exhaustion. There's a general sense of burnout, a fatigue that weekends and time off no longer cures. It's not just my clients. My friends, who span at least a 20-year age range, they also talk about feeling like they're muscling through their days, battling brain fog. They tell me they just can't refuel the way they used to, which makes sense to me from a mental health perspective. Life, particularly in recent years, has felt incredibly unpredictable. And as humans, we can tolerate a lack of predictability for short periods of time, provided we return to homeostasis long enough to reset. But we haven't been able to do that in a long time. We're recording this from the States. And if I were to float back to the last time that I felt, as a society, we were on steady ground, that predates the 2016 election. From that point forward, it has felt like one unforeseeable event has preceded the next. The election resulted in an American president who had a willingness to break from political norms, rules, and traditions in a way that was incomprehensible to some of us. The division sown has left this country with emotional scar tissue. Add to that the endless mass shootings, the death of George Floyd, and the protests for justice that followed, and you can remember the intense swings that we've endured. And in 2020, don't forget the pandemic hit. And unlike other societal crises, which brought people closer together, like 9/11, COVID ripped us apart. Technology helped, allowing us to pivot in a way that transformed the way we work and the way we stay connected. But that's come at a cost. We are measurably more lonely. Our social skills and comfort in social settings still have not reached pre-pandemic levels. And even though most of us do not want to return to a 5-day in-person work environment, many feel lost without the structure and predictability of what our work life and social interactions at work used to look like. And now, it appears as if we're getting a do-over of the 2020 election, and the possibility that regardless of the outcome, it will enrage half the country. All of this is why I say we've had one unpredictable moment after another for almost a decade. And what happens to individuals when they have to endure this rinse and repeat of uncertainty without fully healing before the next event hits, we become vulnerable to post-traumatic stress disorder because these are the circumstances that create it. I feel like society is in a perpetual state of fight or flight, and it feels like PTSD at a macro level. There's something to be said about humans craving, and dare I say needing, predictability and certainty, because it's protective. It plays a crucial role in shielding us from trauma. So if it's true that we've been steeped in all the elements that create PTSD for years, then something else must also be true. We as individuals and as a society must also be capable of experiencing something called post-traumatic growth, which you may not have heard of, but by the end of this conversation, you'll probably be conversant in it. Today, I'm interviewing my first guest on We Need to Talk, and in thinking through who it should be, my mind kept looping to, I need this guest to be someone who leaves me with hope. I too am feeling depleted. I need a breath of fresh air. And suddenly I knew exactly who this guest had to be, Robert Mack. I met him on the first season of Famously Single. Robert holds a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of Happiness from the Inside Out, and he is a leading expert in the field of positive psychology. And I asked him here to talk about post-traumatic growth because selfishly, I need the bump in optimism. I want to know what post-traumatic growth theory says about the potential for profound personal growth following trauma, and whether it's true or hype that individuals who recover from traumatic experiences can emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. So let's hear from him. Robert Mack, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's so great to see you.
It's been too long. It's been too long.
It really has been. So Robert, why don't we start by explaining what is positive psychology?
Yeah, so positive psychology is about a 20 plus year old science, and it's the science of happiness. So most business as usual psychology focuses on mental illness, sometimes human weakness, and positive psychology came along, and it was really the child of Martin Seligman's little baby. For a long time he had worked really on learned helplessness and depression, and he had always thought that if you remove the mental dysfunction or you remove the unhappiness from people, that you'd get a thriving, happy, flourishing individual. But he found that that wasn't the case, that you mostly just got a flatliner. And so he decided that there needed to be an entire new branch field of psychology that really focused on, character strengths and virtues, what makes for a sort of thriving and flourishing life.
Yeah. I also have dipped my toe into some of the training in positive psychology, particularly at a time in my life when I really needed it. And I love Martin Seligman's work. He's a genius. He's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's true. You get rid of depression and you're kind of at neutral. It doesn't mean you're happy. So
Yes.
it was really, really important for somebody to drill down on determining, okay, so how do we bump things up if we want to
Mhm.
go in the positive direction? Because it's great to get rid of symptoms, but then how do you create a thriving, ideal life, a
Mm.
fulfilled life?
You just highlighted something there, Darcy, that I want to reflect back and make sure we underscore because it was so poignant, which is that, we sometimes think about positive psychology like it's positive thinking or positive feeling. And while it includes positive thinking and positive feeling, the positive part really is more about the bump you just talked about. And sometimes that bump isn't smooth, it's not easy, it doesn't always feel positive, but it can result in growth.
Right, exactly. And just to give a little bit more depth to that, this is gonna turn into like a 2-hour episode. I
It
can
always
feel it.
does with
I
you.
can feel it. I
It always
absolutely
does with
feel it.
you.
No, it's the combination, it's the chemistry between us. I absolutely adore you. Um,
Likewise, you know that.
So, if you think about mental health as being on a spectrum, like kind of how we all learned to add and subtract, and we learned about positives and negatives, you've got zero at the middle. And on the right hand side, is this the right
Yeah,
for you?
we'll take
On
it.
the right hand side, you've got the pluses. You start from zero and then you have +1, +2, +3. And on the left-hand side, you've got -1, -2, -3. So we get rid of symptoms happen on the side of the negatives. So you're bringing away somebody's symptoms, and what are you left with? You're left with neutral. It doesn't mean that they're happy. It doesn't mean that they're thriving. And what positive psychology did, it's not bright siding. Positive psychology is one of the most researched aspects of psychology that there is. It's so well researched, it's so grounded in theory.
I was drawn to positive psychology really mostly because I had experienced so much unhappiness and more than that, depression. In fact, I was suicidal for, a solid 2 decades of my life. I remember being suicidal from the age of 6 or 7 years old. And I always thought I'd grow out of it. I just thought I'll eventually become, I don't know, successful, hopefully, academically, maybe athletically. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. I thought that would solve it. And then I thought maybe I'll have some friends eventually, maybe a girlfriend. And some of those things happened, not the professional basketball part, but everything else. And I didn't get happier. I didn't find myself any better off. I found myself worse off subjectively, even though I was doing better objectively. And so I got to a place where I was so suicidal that I did a little research and I decided I was going to slash my wrist. And I had this experience, and then in that moment, sort of the most unexpected thing happened, which is that without anything in my life changing, again, I had a pretty good life. Uh, I felt a level of peace and the kind of ineffable joy and love that you don't expect ever to experience at a time like that, and that you don't think you probably can ever experience in your life at all. And I experienced it at this moment that was my deepest, darkest sort of depression. And so I postponed the suicide at that point for like, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, which for me was kind of laughable. I mean, right now it's laughable almost because it feels so small and so easy to do. But at that time, it was a very tall, ambitious order. And I began doing a different kind of research. And that research was all around what is happiness, what is unhappiness, what's depression, And then I discovered over a period of many, many years, this whole entire field of positive psychology. So then I applied to the program at University of Pennsylvania. That is essentially a master's in applied positive psychology. And yeah, the rest is sort of history.
I've heard bits and pieces of that story, Robert. I never actually heard the full story. Thank you for sharing that. I've actually always wanted to ask you about it because I know it's part of your story, but it's one of those things that if you don't catch the full story early on in a relationship with someone, you're not sure how to, so you want to tell me about that suicide attempt? I
Right,
happen to be a
right,
therapist. You happen to be my friend. I'm not trying to do therapy on
right.
you, but I'm just like, I care about you. I love you. And I wanted to know, this important part of your story. So I thank you for sharing that. Did you actually make the suicide attempt?
I still have the suicide test marks on my wrist. But what happened is I dug the knife in, pretty deep enough to still have the scars. And I, sort of pulled the knife along my wrist there. And I started bleeding, but I didn't really hit a vein, at least not a big one. And so,
Thank God.
yeah, exactly. So just sort of like wrapped a bandage around there real tight. While I did this research, I started to do the research, and yeah, it was really beautiful when I look back, and totally inexplicable at the time. And now I have a lot more understanding around what exactly happened there. But yeah, it's
Yes, I can imagine neurologically what was happening there also. And I would love to have that conversation at another time. But it sounds to me like what happened was as you were literally in the process of a suicide attempt, you had this enlightening feeling and experience, kind of like a near-death experience, where you realized that there has to be another way.
absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. I never thought about it in that way with those beautiful words, but that's precisely the idea. In my contemplation of my own death, I not only came to the end of life in that contemplation, but I came to the end of my problems in that contemplation. That in
So
of itself
fucking
is
deep.
deep, right? Yeah.
I
I
just
was
got
like,
chills down
oh,
and up.
wild. Right. So for a moment in my life, brief moment, I was consciously aware that all was well. Mm, and that, and this is the part that's taken me 20 years to fully appreciate. It wasn't in me thinking and doing more or being more. It was in my not thinking, not doing, and just being. And in that experience of just being and not thinking for even just a micro moment there, I had a not just an understanding that there were no problems, but a real visceral experience of no problems. And so that experience of having no problems or feeling that you have no problems was super joyful. I felt just love, And yeah, it's taken me a long time to come to that understanding, though. I complicated it for years.
So you came to the field in kind of in that moment, or literally in that moment.
Yeah, it was years later, but I had already begun doing the kinds of research that would later become the field of positive psychology. Other people were putting it together more formally and doing actual studies and research. And I was just going online and finding this study and then that study. And then I thought, this is so interesting. There's all this research out there, but I wish there was even more. And then lo and behold, along comes Marty Seligman and all the great people in the field of positive psychology. And I just became obsessed.
It's amazing. So you came to the field of positive psychology in much the same way I come to you, empty cup in hand, hoping, no pressure, Robert. No pressure, but hoping for hope, hoping for a better path, hoping that there's a different way of approaching philosophically and behaviorally the way you live.
Yes, yes. Which is everything. I mean, in A Course in Miracles, there's a great quote, which is a miracle is a shift in perception, or shift in perspective. But that perceptual shift is the beginning of all other kinds of changes. So what you just said, wow, so powerful. Also the openness there. And those were two
Yeah.
qualities I discovered in my own sort of suicidal experience that also led to sort of transformation and later growth for me as well.
Yeah. So I think For the purpose of this conversation, since we are talking about the extent to which as a society we have, I believe we have all endured unpredictable event after unpredictable event for many, many years without enough time in between to actually heal. And I'm making the case that I'm not suggesting that there should be a new diagnosis in the DSM for a macro PTSD, but I do think there's something to be said that the same elements that result in PTSD in individuals are certainly in the zeitgeist of what we're living through right now in history. And so before we get further in the weeds, one of us should define what trauma is. Do you want to take a stab at it or do you want me to? I don't
I'm going
know.
to leave the trauma expert to that.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of weird because I'm sure most people don't realize that I'm actually trauma trained. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But when we talk about trauma, what we're referencing is an experience that leaves a person in intense psychological distress. And it can result from an individual event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances in which the person feels threatened and helpless. That's the combination. So, and it leaves them with a lasting impact on how they function. There's very clear criteria for trauma. We use the term too loosely in society. When I say I feel like we're experiencing PTSD at a macro level, I'm not being flippant. I'm being sincere. I'm also not suggesting we need a real diagnosis. All of that can be true in the same breath. I could also be wrong, but it feels to me like people's inability to refuel, reset, and people's resilience just seems so deeply diminished right now to me. So where does post-traumatic growth fit in with trauma?
Yeah, so your definition of trauma was phenomenal. And you could define post-traumatic growth in the same way. There is an experience of everything often. In fact, there's always psychological and usually emotional distress, and it can be severe. And it can also coincide with post-traumatic stress disorder. But then you get a kind of growth, and we might even call it an aliveness that comes out of that experience of trauma and psychological and emotional distress that leaves the person in ways and better off in lots of ways, at least 5 different ways, right? We can talk about those ways. So the interesting thing about post-traumatic growth is that it's apparently about 2 to 3 times more common than post-traumatic stress disorder, which is wild because, post-traumatic stress disorder, for good reason, gets most of the airplay, gets most of the attention. But post-traumatic growth is a much more common experience for people from all walks of life who have experienced even the most severe trauma and adversity in their lives. And so as scary and as threatening, as frustrating any kind of experience, particularly a traumatic experience, can be, there is this silver lining that exists for at least 2/3 of the people around post-traumatic growth.
I did not know that it is more common to come out of a traumatic experience with post-traumatic growth than post-traumatic stress disorder. So what are the elements? What are the 5 elements that delineate post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, so there are 5 sort of positive responses that characterize post-traumatic growth. It's appreciation for life, right? So you begin to appreciate small and big things in life in a greater way. You notice them more, you pay more attention, you intend to notice them more, you're more aware, you're more mindful of those things. Relationship with others, right? So that becomes strengthened. Often the good relationships are strengthened, the bad relationships are weeded out,
Mm-hmm.
right? New possibilities in life. So that was sort of just seeing new opportunities for yourself. And where you used to see problems, you begin to see opportunities. Spiritual growth, that doesn't have to be formal spiritual affiliation or religious association. It can just be essentially that you begin to see life in the world beyond yourself. You connect your life to, something larger than yourself. There's a purpose behind it all. And then also just personal strength. And personal strength is just you become more resilient, essentially. So those 5 elements or positive responses characterize post-traumatic growth. So, with post-traumatic growth, what generally happens is that someone's entire belief system begins to fall apart. And so there's a breakdown piece of it, right? So
Which happens from the trauma.
That's right.
because that is the essence of trauma. It shatters our worldview.
There you go. So in that shattering of your worldview, you're suddenly open in ways that you weren't open before. And if you were open before, so if you had a personality trait or quality of openness, and you were open before the traumatic experience, the likelihood of post-traumatic growth goes up significantly. Okay.
Wow. So like going back to, and I've talked about this on previous episodes because I am trained in positive psychology. I don't have a master's degree. If I were to get another one, if someone wants to volunteer the payment for a
Well,
master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania is where I'd be going. That would be my next master's degree. But I did just the little training that I have in it. I've spoken a lot about the VIA survey of character strengths, which every one of my clients has to take.
oh, wow.
And from that, we get their values and principles, their character traits, their character strengths, which also wind up being your values and principles. And if openness is one of them, you're much more likely, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, that's
You're
right.
much more likely to emerge from a traumatic experience with the potential for post-traumatic growth.
That's right. So it's openness, and the other trait that's been identified is extroversion. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're not open, not very open, and not extroverted, in other words, you're an introvert or maybe an ambivert, doesn't mean that you can't or won't experience post-traumatic growth. It's just that the likelihood is a lot higher, particularly if you're open and extroverted. With the openness, of course, you're open to new ideas and new ways of seeing the world, new ways of connecting with the world, new ways of experiencing life. With the extroversion, you're more likely to reach out and connect with other people, which then supports the openness. But if you're open, you reach out to other people, you're going to get a lot more stimulation, a lot more sort of diversity in perspectives and thoughts and ideas. And you're also going to get the social support you need to get through the tough experiences. So that social support, by the way, doesn't have to only be friends and family members. It can also be professionals, right? So it's more about reaching out and seeking social support and social connection. So if you have those two qualities or traits, or you've cultivated them, which they can be cultivated, then you are much more likely to experience post-traumatic growth.
Interesting. And this got me thinking. You mentioned that post-traumatic growth emerges from what you're saying out of the dissolution of the worldview that pre-existed the traumatic event. It kind of reminds me of like an addict needs to hit rock
Yes,
bottom. And if they
absolutely.
don't, they're just like, they're still hanging on to their old ways. So you have to hit the bottom deep enough and hard enough to be open
That,
to
that's right.
anything.
That's right. So I'm guessing, although now we're in we're in a space of speculation. However, it makes logical sense, although it could be logical fallacy, that the more open you were, the less severe trauma you need. The less open you are, the more severe trauma you would need to sort of crack that shell, right? So that was the case with me.
That's so interesting. That's
Right.
so interesting. That's totally just, my mind is blowing right now because I'm having this flashback years ago, I guess like maybe, I think it's been like 13 years. So I'm in the rooms. I've been in a 12-step program, not for substance abuse, but for a different issue that I may get to at some point in the future, talk about it. But I remember my first meeting, and people are generally pretty welcoming to newcomers. And some guy came over to me and he was like, "So what brought you to your knees?" And I was like, "I'm not on my knees.
Uh,
I didn't need to be on my knees. I had already seen my fucking problem. I had already bandaged up my problem by the time I walked in there. I was not hemorrhaging anymore, but I knew I could see backwards clearly in hindsight. And I knew that I had this cycle of fixing it. And I was like, I'm just going to fix it and the same thing's going to happen again. History is the greatest indicator of what the future is going to offer. And so that makes sense to me. And I'm sure it's a trait that you can cultivate because that's the beauty of positive psychology. We can cultivate any character traits that we aspire to have.
You crushed it. That's absolutely right. That's what a growth mindset essentially is, right? That ultimately, intelligence, and there are many kinds of intelligence. We think of just one kind of intelligence often, which is like traditional intelligence, which we measure with an IQ test or an SAT test. But we also know and are aware of emotional intelligence, and there are other kinds of intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence and visual intelligence, and all kinds of different types of intelligence is, and they can all be grown. And it helps, you can grow them if you believe you can grow them. Of course, if you don't, you're not going to make any effort to do so, and you're stuck in a fixed mindset around it. So you're absolutely right about that. And gosh, I love what you said, which is like, you've identified something here, and I can speak to my personal experience. You can either grow, and we're not talking about just post-traumatic growth, but you can either grow and evolve and become happier and healthier and wealthier through intelligence or through pain and suffering. I choose, increasingly, I'd love to choose intelligence and awareness, but that hasn't always been the case with me. I can be hard-headed, and I sometimes learn the really slow, hard way. But intelligence, yes. So you nailed it. And part of intelligence, in fact, one way of describing intelligence is an ability to adapt to circumstances and situations. And maybe another way.
Emotional flexibility.
That's right. And exactly that cognitive and emotional flexibility. And maybe another way to talk about that is openness, right? Openness is another way of sort of describing all of that. So the more open you are, the more likely you are to experience post-traumatic growth and probably need less trauma to sort of crack that shell open. And that being said, it's all relative as well. So where you might not need a whole lot of, suffering over here, you might need a ton over at this other thing that you're struggling with. So yes, great point around the intelligence and awareness piece versus this sort of like pain and suffering piece in order to experience both.
I also love this idea about, well, there's something ironic that you said a few minutes ago. The more open you are, the less suffering you need. But ironically, people who tend to be more armored up, we're not born that way. We become that way when life bitch slaps us. And so the more pinched you've been through life, the more likely you are to be a little bit more armored up, the less likely you are to be open,
Wow, Darcy, that's fantastic. I mean, this is why you hear these stories, and it's no accident. You hear these stories about people who, and this is not an encouragement for anyone to go drinking and doing drugs, but why you hear about people that are sometimes like, they might be a little inebriated, and they have a fall, and they fall from a very, from a height that should have resulted in more injuries than it did. Yeah, that just speaks to, it's hard to do, but when you're hit,
so fucking hard to do, man.
Yes, when life hits you,
the best athletes are taught how to fall. They're taught how to roll with it.
That's right. That's right. So the challenge and the opportunity for all of us then, when life or something in life hits you, do you close down and shut down or open up? And it's tough to open up when you just got hit. It's tough to open up, and you don't need to open up right away. But the idea is that you do want it, like you said, roll with it, flow with it. And this is the power of non-resistance, right? And that doesn't mean that you can't self-advocate. Doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries. Doesn't mean that you can't be strong. That's even, by the way, I think one of the things that I know that sometimes people misunderstand about resilience, which by the way is different from post-traumatic growth. But sometimes we get this idea that resilience is being extraordinarily rigid and inflexible.
Oh,
it's not.
No, it's the rebound.
Right.
When I think of resilience, I think of the trampoline. I imagine a trampoline underneath a person.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. As opposed to concrete.
Yeah.
Not very forgiving, and therefore not very, sort of resilient in that way, in the way that that's right.
So you mentioned something about the distinction between introverts and extroverts.
Yes.
Help me with the introverts in the world who are listening to this.
Yeah.
What do they need to do differently, or what do they need to cultivate or try to lean into that may not come naturally for them, so that they can be more likely to emerge from a traumatic experience or series of experiences with a better mindset?
Yeah. So what a beautiful question. I was most shy of my high school class, right? So biggest introvert ever. Ever.
Stop the car.
Yes.
Are you shitting me?
Yes. Most shy of my high school class. And there's nothing worse than being shy than to be recognized for being shy, right? Be put in the yearbook and stuff. That was horrifying for me. And I remember thinking, this is a low moment in my life, and I don't love it or like it. And one day, hopefully I'll change it. That was so the first thing is that I've discovered that while some of us might identify as introverts, no person is an island. Okay. And we will all admit, even the most introverted of us, that we derive some pleasure and joy from other people and or the things that other people have done or do or deliver for us. So for instance, and so to that end, for the introverts, you don't have to seek social support all day, every day. You don't have to do it in ways that you don't enjoy or that don't feel right for you. Simple example, I get burnout pretty quickly over video. And that's partly that I'm just an introvert. I'd rather just do the phone kind of thing. And so I just do the phone, fine. Also, you don't even necessarily need to reach out and seek out to people live in a live way. Like for me, when I was going through depression and suicidal ideation, I don't think anything was more helpful than books, you know? And it's like, well, Rob, how is that being extroverted? But for me, I very much felt like I was having conversations with these authors. Like, you know, all of them were dead authors, but I'm like, wow, I feel like I have a personal relationship with, a connection with, and that I'm friends with, you know, Ramana Maharshi or Joel Goldsmith or Marianne Williamson or Eckhart Tolle or, you know, Martin Seligman. You know, I didn't know any of these people, but I felt like I did. And so for
Yeah.
me, and I think other introverts, you can custom tailor your experience of social stimulation, social connection in ways that I think fit you and suit you best. And it doesn't need to look like what anybody else thinks it should look like. As long as you're finding uplift and you're getting a stimulation of thoughts and ideas, ones that are unlike your own, that's the challenge. So the challenge
I
with,
see what you're saying.
yeah, with the introversion, sometimes we can become so isolated and so centered on self, not necessarily in a bad way, that we don't explore other ways of thinking and living and being. And that's where it can create problems for you if you want to grow. Right?
Yeah, no, I definitely hear what you're saying. It really resonates with me. The idea that you can increase your resilience and increase your likelihood for post-traumatic growth by being just with yourself, provided you're willing to expose yourself to thoughts, concepts, and experiences that are not like the old, lonely, isolating thoughts that feel so familiar to you. So, what I hear you saying is provided the introvert is willing to expose themselves. And for me, what I think of, because music is such an important part of my life, and it is one of the fastest ways to change your emotional state through music, up or down. Music is medicine. It is there for you. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole of depression, there's a whole genre all about that. So you have to be willing to listen to music or watch media that is going to be uplifting. That's going to be different from the thing that feels sedating or that reinforces an isolating or lonely perspective. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. I was very open to new ideas and thoughts. That being said, when I was most depressed, you know, when any of us is feeling low or experiencing low mood, our perspective seems to narrow, tends to narrow and not broaden. You know, the better you feel, the broader your perspective is. So the challenge and opportunity is that when you feel low, your perspective gets more and more narrow and you become this little echo chamber, you know, this sort of like self-perpetuating negative echo chamber. And so you only hear your own thoughts, and it's the same old thoughts over and over and over again. You know, the studies that say we think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Most of them are negative and redundant. It's the same old negative thoughts over and over and over again. And so when you're introverted, there's a danger of that. Now, if you're introverted, but you love reading books and you love listening to podcasts and you occasionally connect with other people and you're open and interested and curious and a learner, you're going to be just fine. The danger and the challenge is that the low mood can sometimes offset that in a way that you get stuck in this self-ruminative loop. That's what becomes problematic.
Yeah, Steph calls it being internally preoccupied.
Yes, there you go. And even extroverts can do that, right? We can experience that with extroverts. So that's why I don't think the ultimate answer is, you know, just being extroverted or just being introverted. The question goes deeper than that. And it's really about this openness piece, the cognitive flexibility piece, you know, being curious and interested and being willing and committed to recognize your own ignorance. It's a beautiful thing, right? So that's another way of talking about intelligence, is knowing that you're ignorant.
Right. Having a beginner's mindset and ignorant not being good or bad. It just is what it is, and trying to adopt a beginner's mindset.
Totally. I love that you shared this 12-step experience that you've had. And, you know, I worked as a spiritual counselor for a period of time in a 12-step program. And it was really different from what I expected it to be, the whole experience. And one of the most beautiful parts about that experience was an expression that you're probably familiar with. And it was, your best thinking got you here.
100%
Right? Your best thinking landed you in this depression or addiction or whatever problem is that you have. I always love that. I'm like, yeah, facts. That's why I'm here. In other words, I don't need to continue confirming and validating and justifying my bad ideas. They're clearly not working.
I really love that. As you know, but our listeners may not know, I am actually a trauma trained therapist. I'm trained to treat PTSD. And I have to tell you, because people come to me because they want help in their relationships or they want help dating. And often what is holding them back is patterns that harken back to their childhood, which are rooted in traumatic experiences. So being trained in healing PTSD and knowing how to employ a tool called EMDR, which we'll talk about on a future episode, which feels like a magic wand to me. It's so powerful, has allowed me very rapidly to pull severely traumatized clients out of a black hole and enable them to then begin to view what they want to do differently in their life as it pertains to their relationships. But if you don't heal the trauma first, it's really hard to do that. In all my trauma training, Robert, I was never taught about PTG, post-traumatic growth. What do you think about that?
Yeah. It aligns with the rest of the field, in that way. And that's the point and purpose, the whole aim and end of positive psychology to a large extent, right? If positive psychology is anything, it's about growth, and not surprised that business as usual psychology, which is extraordinarily critical, and in fact is foundational to really saving lives.
In pathology,
Yes.
it's foundational in pathology.
That's right. So I love that because I think there can be a temptation, and I'm just as guilty of this as anyone, that when someone is experiencing or has experienced severe trauma, to forget about this readiness for change piece. It's like we
Oh
just
my gosh.
dive in, right? And we try to get them to grow, but they're just not in that place yet. They still got a pulled hamstring, metaphorically, they've got an injured arm. You can't ask them to go and run the marathon yet.
You can't put them in physical therapy. You have to heal the muscle first.
That's right. And we've all made this mistake. We've made the mistake with ourselves, with other people. We've all made this mistake. And so, professionals, most of us who are in the space have gone into the space from the purest of intentions, from a genuine wanting to help people. Sure, we want to help ourselves. No question about that. That's often why, at least I got into it, was because I wanted to help myself first and foremost. And I thought, wow, if I can do something like this for myself, could I do something like this for other people too? Wouldn't it be nice? So,
and you're like the hardest nut you know how to crack. And
right.
If you're like, if I can fix me, I can fix anybody.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I'm the poster boy for all problems. So I can certainly solve or help you solve your problem. So yeah, you nailed it. So to your point, and this is a good, I think, recommendation you're making for everyone, whether they're professionals or not, is just make sure you know where the person is with respect to change and with respect to healing. And usually the way you know is they express it first. They'll express something that sounds positive and growth oriented and solution focused and oriented. By the way, another trait and quality that's associated with post-traumatic growth is a future orientation. So if you have a future orientation and you're softly or strongly optimistic before the trauma experience, then the likelihood of post-traumatic growth goes up with that as well. Again, you don't have to be. It's just helpful because when you're optimistic and you're future-oriented, it makes sense why you would suddenly at some point experience growth, as a result of trauma.
What do you mean by future-oriented?
Yeah, so some of us can be stuck in the past. We've probably all had that experience, and be past oriented. Boy, life used to be so good. Those golden days, they were so fantastic, and don't even remember what it was like when we were growing up, kind of thing. And that's okay. It's nice to be nostalgic sometimes and reminisce. Some folks are present oriented, and I'm a big, powerful believer in presence, which is just keeping your mind where your body is, what's happening in this moment. And then some folks are future oriented. So I'd say that a past orientation will get in the way or make it more difficult to grow because you're stuck on these same old experiences and you're reliving them over and over again. You might even be pre-living those experiences into the future. So you think they're going to happen again or stick with you forever. But a present orientation and a future orientation gets you looking forward and not falling under this false belief that the boat is powered by the wake. It's not powered by the wake, right? The wake doesn't power a boat, it has no ability to push that boat forward. So anyway, the idea is that your past doesn't need to dictate or determine your future. You can actually focus on the future and create a new future for yourself that, while has some roots in the past, looks entirely different. It can be healthy despite having an unhealthy experience in the past.
What are some things I can do to be more future oriented other than planning a trip to visit you in Miami, which I'm seriously contemplating.
Please do. Please do.
I literally may show up with my little bag on your front step.
The door will be open, unlocked, and the keys will be waiting for you. So please, yes, I would love that. Well, that's the number one thing to do right there, Darcy. I think you nailed most of it. I would say that for me, it's sort of like if you're open and you're curious and you want to grow and you're focused on controllables, I think it helps to remember what you can control. And it's insanity to try and control things that are uncontrollable. Trying to change the past is impossible. Okay, you can't change what's already happened. The past is history, it's memory, but you can control the present and the future. And the more deeply you know that, the easier it is to begin focusing on the present and future. But you kind of have to want, as justified or valid and legitimate as you are in what you're feeling, frustration, anger, upset, shame, guilt, justified in all that. Doesn't matter what's happened to you. If you feel any of that, perfectly justified. Despite being justified in all that, you're also only messing up your own life. You're only messing up your own experience of life. And we know that. That's another beautiful contribution that positive psychology makes, which is that when you feel better, you do better. And that's hard for people to hear.
100%.
They want 100%. Yeah. When you feel better, you're at your creative best. You're at your problem-solving best. You're a lot more efficient and effective. You access flow state more easily and effortlessly. So you're more, absorbed, consumed, engaged with what you're doing than you are interested in evaluating how you're doing. You make more money. You save more money. You live longer, 6 to 7 years longer, sometimes as many as 11 years longer. You get married earlier, stay married longer, and happier in all your relationships, whether you're married or not. Your rating is more attractive when you feel good. So a Duchenne smile, the kind of smile that you cannot fake, activates 300 muscles. As you know, Darcy, you have a beautiful Duchenne smile all the time.
I mean, it's like the only muscle I haven't paralyzed in my face is the smile.
Hey, whatever works. I love whatever works. So yes, when you feel better, you do better and life goes better. So if you are crystal clear about that, then you can start sort of stop outsourcing your peace and your love and your joy and your happiness to the past or to other people and circumstances that you cannot control. You take back your power and control, and you just focus on feeling better despite the horrible things that may have happened to you. And in doing that, you'll be surprised because life and situations and circumstances begin to shift and change. So it helps to both know that the past is history and sort of memory, that controlling the controllable is sanity, and that you deserve to feel good no matter what's happened to you, and you can do it.
So is it to cultivate a future mindset? Is it about making plans for the future? Is it about how do I do it?
Yeah. So it's mostly about telling a truthful, better feeling story about your life. And
it's about having a more resilient narrative.
Yes, absolutely. It's about having a more resilient narrative. I love the resilient narrative piece. And developing, cultivating optimism. It's really about optimism, right? And optimism, again, like you said so beautifully at the beginning, isn't about pasting smiley stickers on empty gas tanks. It's not about lying to yourself. It's about finding the truth in every experience and then telling that truth in a way that is constructive and supportive and helpful in you feeling what you want to feel, achieving what you want to achieve, or acquiring what you want to acquire. So it's an art, it's a skill, you can practice it. I promise you that if I can get better at it, and of course Darcy can get better at it, then anybody can get better at it, right? So it's just about developing and cultivating optimism. And it's simple. What can you focus on here and now and focus on in your future that feels better to you?
Is it like a yes, the bad thing happened, and also I am very lucky to be alive today. I'm grateful to have my health, if I have my health, and perhaps I'm looking forward to XYZ.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. It's yes and. If you've ever taken an improv class, you have to lean in to whatever's happening, whatever the other characters are doing, and you say, Yes, and then you add your bit to it. And so that's exactly the idea. The examples I use are simple examples, but they're, useful. Plenty of times I've not had any money, like literally no money, like less than no money, because I also had student loan debt. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm just broke. Okay, true. Also, there's only up from here. There's only up from here.
That
That's
is
what I love,
absolutely great. Yeah.
right? I just love living. Another example is I just love sunshine, and I had seasonal affective disorder, certainly as a kid and young adult. And so I don't like rain. Occasionally it's okay.
Mm.
But when it's raining, it's tough. Generally, historically, it's been tough for me. And I realized I can either say it's a bad day, horrible day, or I can say, I really love the sunshine. And the rain does make me increasingly grateful for the days it's sunny. I'm looking forward to it being sunny again. And I know if I can find my way to distract myself long enough today, it'll be sunny again before I know it.
I love that. That's so great. That's really, really great. It sounds like it's a bit of dialectical thinking.
And that the seemingly contradictory ideas that we sometimes we think they're contradictions, but they in the end are complements. They complement each other. And for me, one of the things I've discovered in life, probably the hard way, is that when something seems like a contradiction, even more than that, a paradox. So contradictions often aren't contradictions, they're paradoxes. You're really close to the truth. The truth rarely is as clean and as neat as you think it'll be. And
I truly, as somebody who is a Virgo and loves black and white thinking, I only wish shit was as clean as black and white. And the world is gray. It's gray. It's in the bell curve.
And that's something to celebrate, because that means you can make out of it what you want. And which is, by the way, a huge piece of this post-traumatic growth thing. It's meaning making. We're talking about meaning making. What's the narrative that you're writing? What's the movie that you're producing here, that you're scripting about your life? We tend to think that reality just is. It is the way it is. But we color that experience of our life, whatever it is, with so many thoughts and ideas and opinions and judgments, and we're not aware of it. We've got all these biases and judgments. And you know better than anyone, when you have the first experience, and a lot of those judgments and ideas and opinions are inherited, right? That's a lot of the programming that comes down to us, taught to us, often by very well-intentioned people, sometimes by not well-intentioned people at all. We inherit this, and then when we have an experience, we filter it through that lens, and then we don't realize it. And then later, every time we bring that memory up, we save it, we edit it, and we save it back down. So we think that we're just remembering something. Well, you're not just remembering something and bringing the memory up and then saving it back down the exact way you brought it up or the exact way it happened.
100%.
Right?
This is so important. Yes, keep going.
We edit it every single time unconsciously when we bring that memory up, and then we save it back down. And usually what we do is we edit it in the same way, in the same direction, over and over and over again. And this is how we catastrophize or romanticize our lives.
It's
right?
like doing a deadlift with poor form again and again and again, expecting to get a different result. It's
That's
like
right.
The more times you repeat the memory with the bad technique, and it's not about bright siding the memory. Like, I almost want us to use an example.
Yeah.
Let's conjure up an example.
How about cheating?
Yes.
Yeah. So a good example, and even in our language, this person cheated on me. Okay, that feels fair and that feels true. Let's just try to explain it to me as though I don't know what the word cheating is. What happened there? It's like, if you really break it down and you try to describe or explain reality as it was, I had an expectation and a hope for someone that they didn't agree with or that they didn't align with. They had a day, a month, a year when they had a relationship with someone else. Okay, that feels like, Rob, you're just skirting, just kind of like circumnavigating it. You're kind of like not addressing the issues spot on, dead on. But even using the words cheating and betrayal immediately imposes this additional level and layer of suffering that you now have to at some point undo. And not that it's not true, it's just that
it's symbolic.
Yes.
It's symbolic, and it comes loaded with other powerful negative connotations that make the recovery from that terrible experience even more difficult to overcome.
Yes, exactly. So the way I try to say it is just try to stick to the facts. So you can't have to be positive, don't have to be optimistic, but just try to stick to the facts. What was the fact? The fact is,
describe it without commentary. Is that what it is?
That's exactly right. Exactly. So it's raining. Simple. Okay. My bank account says $0. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Like just
Versus I'm broke.
yes, I'm broke. He's like, whoa, that's a lot happening there. You know, my boyfriend, girlfriend, they had sex with someone else. Okay. That's not going to say that it's going to change your emotional experience of it right away, but at least you won't make your pain more painful. And what we do is we make our pain more painful and we don't realize it. And then before we know it, we continue to, for good reason, we blame other people, conditions, circumstances for how we feel for good reason, justified again. Okay. But when we blame, that also means that if they're responsible for the problem, we've also now made them responsible for the solution, and we've disempowered ourselves to do anything about it. Now, in order to feel better now, in order for my life to go better, they have to change, or that thing has to change. And now you can hold your breath forever trying to pull that off, because people and life conditions, circumstances are terribly unreliable sources of peace, love, and happiness, and they are not likely to change when you want them to change in the direction you want them to change, just because you want them to change.
Exactly. I mean, it's so ironic. I sell change, you sell change, and I'm like, people don't change. Let me just tell you straight up, people do not change. Because, and a better way of phrasing it would be what you just said.
Yeah.
They will change, but unlikely on your timeline and unlikely in the direction or the exact way.
Yeah. Your needing them to change often prevents them from changing because they push back. You push them to change and they're trying to claim their freedom and their own identity. So they're going to say no, it's like a small child. We're all small children in a way. And so you tell me I can't do something, suddenly I want to do it. You tell me I can do something, suddenly I don't care. I don't want to do it that much, especially if it's, obligation. So yes, this part around change and sort of like owning, reclaiming your power and leaning in to the very real possibility that you can influence how you feel regardless of what's happened. And you can make meaning out of it. And that meaning can transcend you and even transcend the other characters involved in a way that benefits your life and benefits other people's lives. That's what sort of post-traumatic growth is all about. It's a sort of transcendent in that way.
Talk to me about the meaning.
Yeah.
Drill down on that a little bit more for me. Can you? What does it mean to walk away from a traumatic experience with meaning?
So there's lots of ways to talk about it. When I was struggling with depression, suicidal ideation, my primary problem was existential. Okay? At first, it was just circumstantial. I was like, oh, I didn't get an A. Oh, I don't have a girlfriend. I probably never will. Oh, I don't have any friends. It seems circumstantial. But when I went deeper, because eventually I experienced some of those things, I suddenly discovered, wait. This is existential. I now have friends and I still don't feel great. I have a girlfriend and I love the experience and she's wonderful. But underneath that is this anxiety, depression, stress, whatever it is. And when I had the suicidal experience, part of that experience felt transcendent. And by that, I simply mean that all of a sudden, hidden within this deep pain was this deep purpose that I'd always very much wanted, but didn't know was right under my nose. And that deep purpose was happiness. And all of a sudden, that was the second piece of it, that my mind went quiet. I felt the peace, love, and happiness that was always there. As I began to think about this experience, I began to create this narrative and construct meaning around that experience. And the meaning sounds like I was deeply depressed and super suicidal. I had the suicidal experience. I felt better. I realized that if I could feel better for one moment, maybe I could do it for 2 moments or maybe 1,000 moments. And while I was looking for my purpose and couldn't find it, this painful experience lit me up to the possibility that if I can be happy, other people can be happy. And now there's meaning in my entire life. All of it has meaning. So for that 20 some years where I felt my life was meaningless and hopeless, I all of a sudden was like, no, Rob, this experience isn't just about you. It's about everyone else in the world, everyone that you can come in contact with. And yes, you can make it a career if you want, like officially, but also maybe your career unofficially is just spreading or sharing your story and connecting with people in a way that uplifts and inspires them to do the same with their lives. And it doesn't have to be around happiness. It can be around something else. So that was transformative. So despite the fact that earlier I said you can't change the past, you can. This is part of the contradictions that surface. All of a sudden, I'm like, wow, in my ability to reinterpret and more deeply understand and appreciate the past. I'm making meaning out of it. And now it's an entirely different experience for me. When I was 25 and you asked me what my childhood was like, horrible, horrific. Oh my God, what do you mean? I just, toxic. Now I'm like, wow, it was this beautiful tapestry that was woven for me in ways I could never have scripted for myself. And it's led to a life that I could never have planned. So the meaning making is that it's that experience of like making sense of the seemingly separate dots, connecting them in ways that make you feel better and that ways are good for you and can be good for other people.
Well, you fucking did it, brother. You did it for me today. You scratched my itch. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for this conversation. That was so profound.
I so appreciate you, Darcy. Talk about meaning, and this is where, as an introvert, maybe an ambivert now, I am just infinitely grateful for the social support and connection that I receive from you, like consistently, even if we're not in conversation for a short period of time, vicariously and virtually. By the way, that's also a thing. I just mentioned this real quick. Vicarious post-traumatic growth is also a thing. And helping professionals often experience it the most.
Well, we for sure experience vicarious post-traumatic stress disorder. We can be traumatized from treating trauma. And is what you're saying that we can be inspired vicariously and have PTG?
Yes.
By being in dialogue with others who have experienced it?
Yes. That's why conversations like this, whether you're participating in the conversation or listening to conversations, can inspire post-traumatic growth in each other, in the folks that are listening. Those people who are listening tell about this whole conversation. And that's also why, firefighters, nurses, therapists, coaches, people that work in helping professions, and helping professionals can take all kinds of different flavors. And, it could be dermatologist, and they experience the most post-traumatic growth for the reasons you just described. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's great.
Yeah. Because they also get to see it all the way through as well, right? Because they get to be a part of it as well. So it helps to contribute to their own growth because they see somebody else growing and they're contributing to that person's growth.
Right. And so often as a therapist, you don't always see them out the other side. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Which is huge, by the way, right? And so I want to, how do you handle that, by the way, Darcy?
Well, I'm lucky. The people that I get, they're really ready. And I don't suffer from that, thank God, so much. The people I get, they're attracted to me because they've tried traditional therapy. It hasn't worked. And I've often thought of myself as the therapist of last resort. Nobody wants to pay the big bucks. I get it. I wouldn't want to pay them either. But fail after fail after fail, and you're still thirsty and you're still open, and that's when I get them. And, I use evidence-based tools. I'm not the smartest one in the room, but I use the tools that the smartest people in the room created. So I stick to the research and I follow it, and people get better, thank God. So what are a few things that our listeners can do to begin employing some of the elements to increase the likelihood that they're going to experience post-traumatic growth?
Yeah. So lots of this will also speak to resilience, right? Because so the beautiful thing about post-traumatic growth is that it's not always or even consistently experienced among the most resilient. It's often experienced among the least resilient.
Okay? Shut the door.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Yes.
That doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah. Well, because if, to a large extent, if you're resilient, you're always growing, and sometimes you don't experience the stress in the same way either.
You don't need it. You don't hit the bottom.
That's right. That's right. You're able to roll through it and you take care of it. And what was really traumatic to somebody else is it doesn't register with you in the same way. You have better coping skills and all that. So resilience is that ability to sort of bounce back better, even more blissful, I'd say, with more aliveness. Post-traumatic growth often happens with those folks who aren't resilient. And with those folks that aren't resilient, you can build resilience. So if you want to experience just more growth in general, and it doesn't have to be post-traumatic growth, you want to, of course, cultivate optimism. There's a scientific way to do that. You can read about that. But cultivate optimism, cultivate openness. Okay. So that means being cognitively agile and flexible and remembering, I think it's a Mark Twain quote where he said, what gets us in trouble is not what we don't know, but what we know that just ain't so. What we think we know that just ain't so, right? So be open to being wrong and choose, if you have to, being wrong and happy over being right and miserable kind of thing, right? So stay open. And then the other part is, find ways, if and when you can, to connect with other people. And you don't have to do it in ways that make you uncomfortable, but you can do it in ways that are supportive and connect with people that don't necessarily share or confirm your ideas and opinions about everything and everyone in the world. This is really healthy. You can still walk away with your own ideas, but just be open to the possibility of your heart being changed or your mind being changed.
Absolutely. And if the people around you are most likely to result in how you're feeling, then you do have to question, do I need to diversify my group? Do I need new breath in my life?
Yes, yes. That's a great point. That's why diversity is so beautiful in all ways, right? In terms, of course, of race and gender and ethnicity and religion, and also thought diversity in thought, and diversity in social circles. So I love that so much. The other thing I'll say is, one way to think about this is, there's a sort of a law of reverse effect. So, water can be turned into steam, steam can be turned into water, right? Like lots of motion can heat something up, but also heating something up can make particles move more quickly, right? So same thing here, I think, with post-traumatic growth, and I'm going on a bit of a ledge here, but the same 5 positive responses that characterize post-traumatic growth can also facilitate post-traumatic growth, right? So they're not just an outcome of it, they can also be sort of an input. And so that is an appreciation of life. So if you can find ways to increasingly appreciate life and diversify that, strengthen your relationship with others, lean into personal strength, build that. Also lean into whatever you feel is spiritual growth and change for you, or perspective. Very helpful in terms of facilitating resilience and post-traumatic growth.
I can't imagine a more impactful conversation and more important information as we roll through 2024 and this American election year. God, do we need post-traumatic growth? Thank you so much, Robert Mack. How can people follow you?
You can follow me at my website. You can go to coachrobmack.com. You can also find me on most social media platforms, probably most consistently, but not very consistently, Instagram at Rob Mack, M-A-C-K official. And you can find both of my published books, Happiness from the Inside Out and Love from the Inside Out, everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Robert Mack, thank you so much for feeding my soul today.
You did the same. Thank you. I appreciate you so much.